Hi everyone, I'm Ava and today I want to tell you about 5 things that the Dutch are more willing to pay for than Americans. Now, when I moved to the Netherlands last year, I noticed that certain things that were free in the US were actually not free in the Netherlands. So that of course came as a little bit of a surprise to me. To be really honest with you, some of these things, it hadn't even occurred to me that they could be free in one country and you would have to pay for them in another. I mean, I know that certain things can be more expensive in one country and cheaper in another, but I was really surprised to find that certain things were actually free in the US, but not here in the Netherlands. And because they're not free, I'm assuming that Dutch people are more willing to pay for these things, or at least they're more used to paying for these things. Now, for some of these things that I'm going to be talking about in this video, I actually think that Americans should want to pay for these things. And you'll see what I'm talking about in just a moment. But I do think that some of these things actually shows the differences between the Netherlands and the US in a really nice way. So let's get to it. The number one thing that I wasn't used to paying in the US, but I started paying for here in the Netherlands, are public restrooms. Now, in the US, when you go to a train station or a bus station, I pretty much expect that I will be able to use the restroom for free. I mean, it never even occurred to me that I would need to pay in order to, well, do my thing in there. But when I came to the Netherlands, I realized pretty quickly that that was not the case. So here at train stations, and I mentioned how great the trains are, I take trains all the time, that if you want to use the public restroom there at the train stations, you need to pay a small amount in order to, well, get in there. And it's not really expensive, it's just a few cents. So I think it's about 60 or 70 cents at the train stations if you want to use the restrooms. I do think that if this were to happen in the US, people would flip. Now, if people were to start charging for public restrooms in the US, there would be a huge outrage. But here in the Netherlands, people seem more than willing to pay the few cents in order to use the restrooms. Now, it is a small amount, but I can imagine in the US that if people started charging to use public restrooms, many people would actually be hindered from using them. Here in the Netherlands, the culture is a little different, the way the country is set up is a little different. So from what I have seen, it doesn't seem to be stopping people from using the restroom. I, on the other hand, wait. I hold it in, wait until I go to a cafe or somewhere else outside where, I'm sitting down and I can use the restroom for free, or I just wait till I get home. I don't know what it is, I'm just not willing to pay those few cents to use the public restroom. Because that's just what I'm used to. I'm used to doing this for free, so it almost feels like I'm being cheated when I go into these public restrooms and I need to pay for them. I know it's just a difference of a few cents, but hey, to me, it's the principle. But speaking of principles, I have noticed that the restrooms, the public restrooms here in the Netherlands, are much cleaner than the public restrooms in the US. Maybe precisely because you pay for them. In the couple of times that I have paid to use these restrooms, because sometimes you gotta go when you gotta go. So in the couple of times that I have used these public restrooms, I really noticed that in the Netherlands, they are much cleaner than the ones in the US. Now, I cannot prove to you that that is because we pay to use the restrooms here in the Netherlands, but there seems to be a strong indication that that is the case. The other thing that I wonder about in these cases, and I don't know the answer to this, is whether paying for it actually improves the wages of the people who work here in the Netherlands in taking care of the sanitation of the public restrooms. Because I know in the US, sanitation workers, in many cases, not always, in many cases don't make a very high income, and I think that's not great. So these are some things to consider. Would it improve the wages of these workers if we were to pay for our public restrooms in the US? Food for thought. The number 2 thing that was a little bit of a shock to me when I discovered that I would now need to pay for it was my bank account. In the US, opening a checkings account at a bank, like a very basic account, is generally free. I have never owned a bank account, and I've switched banks a few times in the US, where I needed to pay to open my account. If you are American and watching this, or if you're just not Dutch and you can relate to this, in the US, we don't pay for our bank accounts, but here in the Netherlands, you will pay somewhere between €1.50 to €2 per month for your bank account, for each bank account. Now, isn't that insane? Now, that is something I had a really hard time getting on board with. This is something that I actually don't quite understand. If you're Dutch and watching this, Why do you think it is that we pay for our bank accounts? I understand that it's a service, but I'm just so used to it being free in the US. And what about banks that are international, where they have branches in the US and here in the Netherlands? I wonder if they don't charge in the US and they charge in the Netherlands. I really need to look this up. But yes, Dutch people, you could have your bank account for free in the US. That is just something that I used to take for granted. And now I pay. I pay every month for my bank account. And it's not a lot of money. But again, it's the principle of it. I know that this can be free. But here, I pay for it. Number 3 is water. Now, this is a little bit trickier than just saying, well, in the Netherlands, you need to pay for water if you want it at restaurants, and in the US, you don't. Because while this used to be the case before, I know that when I used to visit the Netherlands 4 years ago, people would tell me, okay, you need to pay for your water here. If you go to a restaurant or a cafe, if you want water, you pay for it. And I was used to this because in other European countries, that's also the case, like in Germany or Switzerland. But what I've noticed is that here in the Netherlands, that is slowly changing. In the US, Dutch people, if you go there, you will find that when you seat yourself at a cafe or restaurant, you will always get a ton of water with a ton of ice, because that's just what Americans like. Americans really like ice. But you will get a lot of tap water, and then you order a drink on the side. And it's not even rude if you drink tap water the whole night. It's just part of our culture. We have water always. Now, here in the Netherlands, I said it was changing, and that's true. I've seen that people now sometimes offer tap water in a really fancy bottle, and I quite enjoy it. But that's not always the case. I was recently charged for water when I went to a restaurant in Amsterdam. Yep, I asked for tap water, was very clear about it, and I paid for it at the end. And it said, tap water, $1.50 on my bill. I mean, why? Why? It's free water. Just the water here in the Netherlands is great. Just open up the tap from your bathroom. What do I care? And put it in my glass and give it to me for free. But no, that's not very common. But I said this was tricky about water because the thing that I actually noticed about how free water is so entrenched in American culture is that in the US, you will see water fountains basically everywhere. So you go to the airport and there will be a water fountain for you to get water at. If you go to a public school, if you go to a museum, or if you go to, what are some other public things? Oh yes, public train stations and bus stations where you can't use the restroom for free. And therefore, I'm assuming you can't go in and get the water for free from the bathrooms, even if that was an option you wanted to pursue. But in the US, there are water fountains everywhere. You will just see them, the kind that you've probably seen in American TV shows or movies where you can press the little button and the water spurts out. I'm describing a fountain to you. That's really silly. I should not do that. But basically, water fountains everywhere, so you would never need to go around buying water bottles, which is bad for the environment. So that is one thing that I actually like about the US, that you have public fountains everywhere. Now, whether they're clean, that is a different story. They're fine to drink. I'm talking about the actual fountain. Moving along to number 4, which are bags at grocery stores. Now, this is one of those things that I think Americans should definitely want to pay for more, and I already know that in New York, you have to pay for them. But generally speaking, in the US, using bags are free. Oh, and what that results in is a lot of bag use, which is really terrible. However, in some places, in some grocery stores in the US, actually the giant grocery store that is owned by the same company that owns Albert Heijn here in the Netherlands. So that grocery store, for instance, offers paper bags to use for free. Now, here in the Netherlands, you have to pay for your bags. It's not a lot. It's a few cents. All of these things are a few cents. It's just to me that I just didn't know when I would go to the grocery store. I would just take a bag, and when they would say, okay, that bag will be X amount. Oh, or even worse, I took one of these bags after I had paid for my groceries. And of course, I was at the cash register with a person helping me out because I didn't have a Dutch bank account at the time. And of course, you cannot use the self-checkout counters. But anyway, I was with this person and they had helped me take all of my stuff and, helped me pay for it. I paid. And then as I was leaving, I just grabbed one of these bags and they were like, okay, just slide it here, please. I thought these bags were free. They're not free. I think at the time I even knew that I had to pay for them, but I had just forgotten because it was so second nature for me to just grab these bags. Americans have a tough time accepting this because it's just another thing you have to pay for, And if you guys are at all familiar with the US, you know that Americans have to pay for a lot of things out of pocket anyway. So even if it's a few cents, people have a hard time switching from not paying anything to paying a few cents for something that they were just used to considering to be free. And finally, number 5, refills. Okay, this one I really miss. Out of all the things that I've talked about, this is the one that I just can't get over. I miss my refills. In the US, you order a drink, for instance, a coffee, and usually it is a bottomless cup. What that means is you can just ask for more. You finish a cup, you get another cup of coffee, and it's never ending until you've had your fill. That is amazing. I love that. Now here in the Netherlands, people are used to just getting a cup, and if they want another cup, they pay for that other cup. This would not fly in the US. Americans would not be willing to pay for this. I mean, you want to hike up college tuition every year? No problem. That happens every year and people don't seem to care about it. But you start charging for refills, even if it's a few cents, people are going to care about it. But in this case, it isn't even a matter of a few cents in the Netherlands. I will say that I pay $3 for a coffee, let's say, and then if I want another coffee, I have to pay another $3 for it. Now, if I go to a local cafe, I'm very happy supporting them and doing this, of course. I'm really happy to pay for things when it's supporting people, and in most cases it is here in the Netherlands. But it is just really different coming from the US, where you're really used to this different lifestyle. Like when I go to brunch, I fully expect that I will have a few cups of coffee with my meal. For many people, this is soda. I think that is a really big difference for Americans here in the Netherlands, where you get this tiny little thing of soda, and then you have to pay if you want more. It's just what you're used to. But hey, Dutch people seem to be willing to pay for that, but not Americans. To me, the most entertaining part of this is I've actually heard Dutch people say that they are really happy to pay for their second cup because they actually want to be able to measure how much they're consuming. And I thought this was really interesting because in the US, I don't think I ever think about how much coffee I'm drinking or how much soda I'm drinking. I don't really drink soda, but when I used to as a kid, I think we just really love our refills, so people don't think about how much they're consuming, which has become a problem in some cases, absolutely. But generally speaking, when it's something like black coffee, people just don't think about it. They just get their refills. But even for coffee, I've heard Dutch people say that they like to keep track of what they're drinking. And not in a really micromanaging, crazy way. Just in a, we're used to knowing how much we're drinking. We want to have control over that kind of way. And I totally see it. So they don't mind here in the Netherlands to pay for it. Whereas in the US, we're all about our big sizes and our value. And what better value than if it's free? Anyway, those are my 5 things that I've noticed Dutch people are more willing to pay for just because I guess they have to, and it's a different culture. In the US, these things are free, and I definitely had to get used to paying for them here in the Netherlands. If you guys know of any other things that are different between the US and the Netherlands, let me know in the comments as usual.